A shelter leopard recognized his rescuer after years, and the reaction made everyone cry. A woman who once risked everything to save a helpless cub thought that chapter of her life was over. But when the fully grown predator locked eyes with her in front of a stunned crowd, something extraordinary happened. In that single moment, the past roared back to life along with the dangerous enemy who never forgave her for what she did. As secrets long buried begin to surface, threats close in, and one wrong step could mean losing everything she fought for. This isn't just a story about an animal's memory. It's about justice, betrayal, and the unbreakable bond between a rescuer and the life she saved. But when the leopard's recognition puts them both in the crosshairs of a ruthless man, will courage be enough to protect them, or will the past finally destroy them both? Before we begin, tell me your city or country in the comments. It turns this space from a screen into a circle of real hearts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty roadside menagerie, where Karina Doyle's heart pounded against her ribs as she crouched before a rusted cage. Inside, a leopard cub lay motionless on the dirty floor, its ribs showing through patchy fur. The stench of neglect hung heavy in the air, mixing with the New Mexico heat. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, her hand steady despite her racing pulse. At 22, she'd seen her share of rescue operations, but nothing like this. The cub's golden eyes, dulled by hunger and fear, tracked her movements as she worked the lock. "What do you think you're doing?" A sharp voice cut through the air. Harold Sutter's heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. Karina didn't turn around. She couldn't waste a second. The lock finally gave way with a click. "This cub needs immediate medical attention. Mr. Sutter, your permits don't cover endangered species, and this animal is clearly suffering." "You've got no right." Sutter's voice rose, edged with fury. "That's my property you're messing with." The cub barely stirred as Karina gently lifted it from the cage. Its body felt frighteningly light in her arms. "Animals aren't property," she sighed, finally turning to face him. "And this one's going to a licensed shelter." Sutter's face had turned an ugly shade of red. His expensive shirt stretched tight across his chest as he jabbed a finger at her. "You're making a big mistake, girl. Do you have any idea who I am in this state?" "Someone who's breaking federal wildlife protection laws," Karina answered, her voice steady even as her heart hammered. She cradled the cub closer, feeling its weak breath against her arm. "Step aside, Mr. Sutter. Don't make this worse than it already is." "You're the one who's going to regret this," he snarled. But he didn't move to stop her as she walked past him to her waiting truck. The shelter was only 30 minutes away if she hurried. The cub survived the journey, but that was the last time Karina saw it. The shelter whisked the little leopard into intensive care, and then into their rehabilitation program. She filed her reports, documented everything properly, and waited for justice to take its course. Instead, her world fell apart. First came the whispers, then the canceled interviews. Suddenly, her applications for wildlife positions were being rejected without explanation. Sutter's influence ran deep, and his version of events, painting her as a reckless activist who endangered animals with unauthorized seizures, spread like poison through the wildlife care community. 10 years later, Karina wiped down the examination table at the Santa Fe Veterinary Clinic where she worked, her movements efficient but lacking joy. The morning light streamed through the window, highlighting the silver name tag that read veterinary assistant instead of the wildlife rehabilitator title she'd once dreamed of. "Karina?" Sarah, the receptionist, poked her head in. "Thought you might want to see this." She held out a newspaper, folded to show a small article. The words seemed to leap off the page. "Rehabilitated leopard to be presented before sanctuary transfer." Karina's hands trembled slightly as she read further. The leopard's name was Kale, rescued 10 years ago from an illegal roadside operation. The presentation would be tomorrow at the same shelter where she'd taken that weak cub so long ago. "You okay?" Sarah asked. "You've gone pale." Karina forced a smile. "I'm fine, just remembering something." She handed the paper back, but the words stayed with her all day, through routine checkups and vaccine appointments. That evening, sitting in her small apartment, Karina stared at her computer screen, where the shelter's announcement glowed mockingly. Should she go? The sensible answer was no. She'd rebuilt a quiet life here, far from the controversy that had derailed her dreams. Seeing Cale, if it was even the same leopard, would only stir up painful memories, but her mind kept returning to those golden eyes, to that moment of connection when she'd first opened the cage. She'd never known what happened to that little cub. Had her actions that day made a difference? Or had she just succeeded in destroying her own future for nothing? "It's just professional curiosity," she told herself firmly, clicking the register to attend button. "I should see how they handle these presentations. It might be useful knowledge for the clinic." But as she lay in bed that night, Karina knew she was lying to herself. She needed to know. After 10 years of second-guessing that day, of wondering if she should have done things differently, she needed to see with her own eyes that the cub's suffering hadn't been in vain. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, she allowed herself to remember that fierce surge of certainty she'd felt when she'd first spotted the cub in that filthy cage. Despite everything that had followed, despite Sutter's revenge and her shattered dreams, she knew in her heart she'd do it all again. Some things were worth any price. The memory of those golden eyes followed her into her dreams, where past and present swirled together, and a weak cub grew into a strong leopard that still somehow needed her protection. Tomorrow would show her. If any part of those dreams could become reality. The afternoon sun filtered through the shelters, large windows as dozens of people gathered for the special presentation. Camera crews from local news stations adjusted their equipment while visitors filled the rows of folding chairs. The air buzzed with excited whispers and the occasional click of phones being readied to capture the moment. Karina stood near the back, her heart racing beneath her casual blue sweater. She hadn't planned to come so close to the front, but the crowd had shifted, pushing her forward until she could clearly see the secure enclosure where Cale would appear. Her fingers twisted nervously in the hem of her sleeve. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Dr. Martinez, the shelter's director, her voice carrying across the room. "Today we're proud to introduce you to Cale, a remarkable example of successful wildlife rehabilitation. In a few days, he'll be transported to his permanent sanctuary home." 2 handlers in protective gear emerged from a side door, carefully guiding a magnificent adult leopard into the reinforced display area. Karina's breath caught in her throat. The sickly cub she'd rescued had grown into a powerful, graceful creature. His spotted coat gleamed with health, muscles rippling as he moved with fluid confidence. At first, Cale seemed indifferent to his audience, pacing the perimeter of his enclosure with typical big cat aloofness. Cameras flashed and children pointed, but he paid them no attention. Then suddenly, he stopped. His entire body went still, and his head turned sharply toward the crowd, toward Karina. The leopard's golden eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made the air feel electric. The casual chatter in the room died away as people noticed the change in his behavior. Cale moved closer to the barrier, his focus unwavering. "This is unusual," murmured Dr. Martinez, her professional calm masking concern. The handlers exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene. Karina felt rooted to the spot. Her mind flashed back to that desperate day at the roadside menagerie, to the trust in those same eyes when she'd lifted the starving cub to safety. Without conscious thought, she took a step forward. "Ma'am, please stay back," one of the handlers warned, but Dr. Martinez held up a hand. Watching intently, Cale pressed against the barrier, his posture changing from predatory alertness to something softer, almost yearning. A low rumble emerged from his throat, not a growl, but the same chuffing sound he'd made as a cub when Karina had treated his wounds. Phones rose in the audience, recording this unexpected development. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd, as people sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. "He knows her," someone said in an awed voice. "Look at how he's acting." Karina moved closer still, her movements slow and deliberate. Her hands were steady now, her earlier nervousness replaced by a deep calm she hadn't felt in years. "Hello, beautiful boy," she said softly. "You've grown so strong." The leopard's response was immediate, a deeper chuff, his eyes half closing. In what cat experts would recognize as contentment. The transformation in his body language was unmistakable to everyone watching. "Security, please escort this woman backstage," Dr. Martinez said quietly to her staff. "Carefully. And someone find out who she is." Two security guards approached Karina gently. "Ma'am, would you come with us, please?" She nodded, knowing this moment had changed everything. As she followed them through a door marked "Staff Only," she could hear the excited buzz of conversation exploding behind her, phones chiming with notifications as videos began uploading to social media. In a small office, Dr. Martinez joined them within minutes. "I believe you're Karina Doyle," she said, studying her with keen interest. "The volunteer who rescued Cale 10 years ago. We have the intake records." "Yes," Karina replied simply. Her hands were shaking now as the adrenaline began to fade. "What just happened out there? That kind of recognition after so many years?" Dr. Martinez shook her head in amazement. "It's extraordinary. But we need to discuss safety protocols and public relations. This will generate significant attention." Karina listened as the director outlined their concerns, but her mind kept returning to those golden eyes, to the instant of connection that had just shattered her careful anonymity. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket, likely friends who had already seen the videos appearing online. "Take some time to process this," Dr. Martinez advised as their discussion concluded. "But be prepared, your life may get complicated again very quickly." Leaving the shelter, Karina felt simultaneously exhausted and more awake than she had in years. The late afternoon sun caught the tears in her eyes, tears she hadn't realized were falling. A decade of hiding in the shadows, of doubting her own judgment that desperate day, and in one unplanned moment, a leopard's perfect memory had validated everything. Her phone buzzed again as she reached her car. The first video had already gone viral, with comments pouring in from around the country. The quiet life she'd built was about to change dramatically, but for the first time in years, Karina felt ready to face whatever came next. The video of Cale recognizing Karina spread across social media like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had gathered millions of views, with animal behavior experts weighing in on the remarkable display of long-term memory in big cats. Local news stations picked up the story, running heartwarming segments about the reunion between rescuer and rescued. But not everyone was celebrating this viral moment. In his sprawling ranch office outside of Fay, Harold Sutter watched the video for the 10th time, his jaw clenched tight. The leopard's obvious recognition of Karina threatened everything he'd built. If people started digging into the past, asking questions about where Cale came from, he reached for his phone, scrolling through his extensive contact list. "Time to remind some people where their interests lie," he muttered. Within days, subtle pressure began mounting on the wildlife shelter. Major donors received concerned phone calls about the liability risks of involving unauthorized personnel in animal transfers. Anonymous posts appeared online questioning the shelter's judgment in allowing the disgraced former volunteer near dangerous animals. Karina first noticed something was wrong when she overheard whispered conversations at work, stopping abruptly when she entered the room. Then came the anonymous text messages. "Stay away from the shelter. You've caused enough trouble." Some stories should stay buried. Think about your job, your life. Back off. She deleted each message, but they kept coming. The shelter's board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. Dr. Martinez invited Karina to attend. The timing for Cale's transfer to the sanctuary is critical, Dr. Martinez explained to the assembled board members. But we're facing pressure from multiple donors threatening to withdraw support if we involve Ms. Doyle in the process. It's clearly orchestrated, said one board member, frowning. The question is, can we afford to ignore these threats? Karina sat quietly, listening to them debate the risks. Her hands were folded in her lap, steady despite her racing heart. When there was a pause in the discussion, she spoke up. I understand if you need to distance yourselves from me, she said carefully. But please don't let this affect Cale's transfer. He deserves his best chance. Dr. Martinez studied her thoughtfully. Actually, our veterinary team believes having someone he trusts involved could reduce his stress during transport. If you're willing to help despite these threats. I am, Karina said firmly. I won't be scared away, not again. That night, Karina worked late at the veterinary clinic, catching up on paperwork. The street outside was quiet, illuminated by pools of yellow lamplight. As she gathered her things to leave, movement caught her eye through the window, a car idling across the street, its headlights off. Her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to move normally, checking that all doors were locked before heading to her car. The idling vehicle's engine rumbled to life as she approached her car, but it didn't move. Under her windshield wiper, she found a note printed on expensive paper. You're playing a dangerous game. Walk away now while you still can. Karina's hands trembled as she read the words, recognizing the same heavy paper stock Sutter used for his business correspondence. The implied threat was clear. He knew where she worked, where she parked, when she was alone. The idling car finally pulled away, its taillights disappearing around the corner. Karina stood in the empty parking lot, the threatening note crumpled in her fist, and made her decision. 10 years ago, she'd let Sutter's intimidation tactics drive her into the shadows. She'd watched him continue his profitable wildlife experiences. Business, knowing what really happened to the animals in his care. She'd stayed quiet, rebuilding a small, safe life for herself. But now Cale's recognition had changed everything. The Leopard's trust had done more than validate her past actions. It had awakened something in her that couldn't be silenced again. Sutter's threats confirmed that this story touched something deeper, something he desperately wanted to keep hidden. Karina smoothed out the crumpled note and carefully placed it in her purse. Evidence. Then she got in her car and drove home, her mind already forming plans. She would not step aside this time, even if it meant risking the stability she'd worked so hard to rebuild. This time, she would stand her ground. For Cale, for all the other animals in Sutter's facilities, and for herself. The morning of Cale's pre-transfer check dawned crisp and clear. Karina arrived early at the shelter, her breath visible in the cool air as she walked toward the quarantine area where Cale's transport cage waited. The massive metal structure dominated the space, a necessary but imposing piece of equipment for moving a full-grown leopard safely. As she approached, something caught her eye, a shadow moving where it shouldn't be. Through the chain-link fence, she spotted a figure in dark clothing crouched beside Cale's transport cage, working at something with quick, furtive movements. A metallic glint flashed in the morning light bolt cutters. Karina's heart leaped into her throat. Without hesitation, she slammed her hand on the emergency alarm mounted on the nearest post. The harsh buzzer shattered the morning quiet. Hey! She shouted, already running toward the gate. Stop right there! The saboteur's head snapped up. He was a stocky man she didn't recognize, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. As she sprinted across the compound, she saw him abandon the bolt cutters and shove Marcus, one of the handlers who had come running at the alarm, The impact sent Marcus stumbling backward into the cage. The sudden movement and noise startled Cale, who had been watching warily from inside. The big cat snarled and threw himself against the cage wall. There was an awful screech of metal. The weakened latch, partially cut through, began to give way. Karina didn't stop to think. She threw herself between the failing section of cage and the saboteur's escape route. The man hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. "Dave!" She shouted to the tech who had appeared from the building. Secondary lock now. Dave moved with practiced efficiency, hands steady as he secured the backup locking mechanism. Those precious seconds were all they needed. The sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of security, and the saboteur turned and fled, vaulting over a low fence and disappearing into the brush beyond the compound dot as security gave chase. Karina sagged against the now secured cage, her heart pounding. Inside, Cale paced restlessly but was gradually settling. She could feel the curious stares of the shelter staff who had gathered during the commotion. "That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," Marcus said, rubbing his shoulder where he'd been pushed. "Probably both." But there was new respect in his voice. Dr. Martinez hurried over, her face tight with concern. "Is everyone all right? Karina, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Karina assured her, though her hands were shaking now as the adrenaline began to fade. "Cale's secure. The backup lock held." "You realize you could have been seriously injured," Dr. Martinez said, but her tone was more thoughtful than scolding. "If that cage had given way, I couldn't let him get away," Karina replied simply. "And I couldn't let Cale get hurt." The shelter staff gathered for an emergency meeting immediately afterward. The attempted sabotage had shaken everyone, but it had also demonstrated something important. They had all seen Karina's quick thinking and willingness to put herself on the line to protect both animal and human safety. "This proves what we're up against," Dr. Martinez addressed the group. "Whoever is trying to stop this transfer isn't afraid to use physical force. We need to be prepared for more attempts." She paused, looking directly at Karina. "And we need people we can trust completely. People who will do whatever it takes to keep Cale safe." The message was clear. Karina had proven herself beyond doubt. Her competence and courage had transformed her from a controversial figure to an essential part of the transfer team. But the morning's events had also confirmed the chilling reality. The threat to Cale's safe transfer was real and escalating. They were no longer just facing political pressure or social media campaigns. Now there was physical danger to contend with. As the meeting dispersed, Karina walked back to check on Cale. The big cat watched her approach, his golden eyes calm now. She pressed her hand against the cage mesh, and he moved closer, his breath warm against her fingers. "We'll get you to safety," she promised quietly. "No matter what it takes." The morning after the sabotage attempt, Karina sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. Her coffee had gone cold, forgotten as she pored over shelter logs and permit records spread before her. Something about the timing of Cale's extended stay at the shelter didn't add up. She ran her finger down a column of dates, frowning. According to the shelter's records, Cale should have been cleared for sanctuary transfer years ago. Yet here were state permits with conflicting dates, each suggesting different timelines for his rehabilitation. "That can't be right," she muttered, pulling another folder closer. A gentle knock at her door made her jump. It was Eli Marston, the shelter's volunteer attorney, holding a leather briefcase and wearing a concerned expression. "Dr. Martinez mentioned you were looking into the paperwork," he said as Karina invited him in. "I thought you might want another set of eyes." Karina gestured to the paper-covered table. "I'm finding things that don't make sense. Look at these dates." Eli settled into a chair, rolling up his sleeves as he examined the documents. His dark hair, streaked with early gray, fell across his forehead as he leaned forward, legal pad ready. "Here." Karina pointed. The original rehabilitation assessment from when I first brought Cale in. It shows he was healthy enough for transfer after 18 months. But then there's this permit application dated 3 years later, claiming he needed extended observation. Eli's pen moved across his pad, making neat notes. And these shell companies listed as concerned parties on the permits. I've seen similar names before. They pop up in other cases where animals were kept in facilities longer than necessary. They worked through the morning, creating a timeline on Eli's legal pad. As they cross-referenced documents, a pattern emerged. Each time Cale had been close to transfer, a new permit issue would arise, filed by a different corporate entity. "Look at these company names," Eli said, spreading out several permits. Wildlife Education Ventures, Natural Heritage Holdings, Apex Animal Experiences. They all trace back to different P.O. boxes, but the filing signatures share similar handwriting. Karina's hands began to shake as she recognized the pattern. "This is exactly what happened to me," she whispered, "when I tried to report the conditions. At Sutter's facility, suddenly there were all these complaints filed against me. Different names, different companies, but all saying the same things." Eli looked up sharply. "You think Sutter's behind these permit delays?" "It fits his pattern," Karina said, her voice growing stronger. "He creates these shell companies to make it look like there's widespread opposition to whatever he wants to. Stop. He did it to destroy my career, and now I'm seeing the same tactics in Cale's paperwork." They spent the next hour tracing the connections. Each shell company had filed objections or permit complications that kept Cale in a holding pattern. Meanwhile, Sutter's wildlife experience business had grown, charging visitors to see rehabilitation in action. "He's been using Cale as a profit center," Eli said grimly. Every delay meant more months he could point to the shelter and claim he was supporting wildlife rehabilitation. It was all a show. The realization hit Karina like a physical blow. She sank into her chair, memories of her own ordeal flooding back. "All these years, I thought he just wanted to punish me for exposing his operation, but it was bigger than that. He turned my rescue of Cale into a business opportunity." Eli gathered the most damning documents into a separate file. "This is worth investigating further. These permit delays didn't just affect Cale. If Sutter's been running this scheme with other animals, that's why he's so desperate to stop Cale's transfer now," Karina said. "When Cale recognized me at the presentation, it created a connection between his current operation and what happened 10 years ago. If people start looking too closely at the paperwork, they'll find exactly what we found," Eli finished. "A pattern of deliberate delays and false permits, all designed to keep animals in limbo while Sutter profits from their captivity." Karina stood and walked to her window, watching the morning sunlight paint the Santa Fe mountains. The truth she'd uncovered settled heavily in her chest. Sutter hadn't just attacked her reputation all those years ago. He'd built an entire system of exploitation on the foundation of her silence. "We need to be careful with this information," Eli advised, his voice gentle but firm. "Sutter has powerful connections. If he realizes we're uncovering his permit scheme, he'll try to bury it all again," Karina said. "Like he buried me." She turned back to face Eli, her expression resolute. "But this time I have proof. And this time, I'm not alone." Eli nodded, beginning to organize the documents into clear categories. "We'll need to verify every connection, document every inconsistency, build an airtight case before we make any moves." Together, they spent the next few hours creating a detailed timeline of Sutter's scheme. Each piece of evidence they uncovered reinforced the pattern, a decade of manipulation and fraud, all hidden behind a facade of legitimate wildlife conservation. For Karina, each revelation was both vindication and heartache. The truth about her past was finally emerging, but with it came the knowledge that Cale and countless other animals had suffered years of unnecessary captivity because of Sutter's greed. "We'll make this right," Eli assured her, seeing the pain in her expression. For Cale, and for you. Karina gathered the scattered papers into neat piles, her movements deliberate and focused. The truth had been hidden in these documents all along, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Now that she understood the full scope of Sutter's deception, she felt a new strength rising within her. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about exposing a system that had trapped both animals and people in its web of lies. The evening sun cast long shadows through the shelter's meeting room windows as Karina spread documents across the wooden table. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and dark circles under her eyes betrayed nights of careful research. Beside her, Eli Marston leaned forward in his chair, his sleeves rolled up as he examined a timeline they'd constructed. "Look here," Karina said, pointing to a permit date. The transfer approval for 3 exotic cats was dated June 10th, but the intake records show they arrived 2 months earlier. They were holding animals without proper documentation. Eli nodded, making notes in his precise handwriting. "And that's not an isolated incident. I've found similar discrepancies in at least 7 other cases." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "We need to document every instance meticulously. Chain of custody is crucial." Over the next few hours, they created detailed spreadsheets tracking every animal's movement through Sutter's facilities. The pattern was clear delayed paperwork, missing signatures, and convenient clerical errors that kept valuable animals in his possession far longer than legally allowed. "We should get sworn statements from former employees," Eli suggested, his voice steady and focused. Anyone who witnessed these practices firsthand. Karina felt a flutter of hope. "I know a few who might be willing to talk now. They were afraid before, but seeing Cale recognize me publicly, it's changed things." The shelter's director, Sarah Martinez, joined them with coffee and a determined expression. "I've spoken with the board. We're behind you 100%. What happened to Cale and to you, Karina, it can't happen again." Just then Karina's phone buzzed. A text from one of their medical suppliers. "Sorry, can't fill your next order." Nothing personal. She showed it to the others. "Sutter's starting to squeeze," Eli observed grimly. "He's pressuring vendors." "Let him try," Karina said firmly. "We've got something he didn't count on this time proof." The next morning, Eli arrived with news. "I've reached out to some contacts at the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're interested, but they need rock-solid evidence before they'll move." They worked through lunch, organizing documentation into clear chronological order. Karina couldn't help noticing how Eli's hand brushed hers as they reached for the same file, or how his quiet strength helped steady her when the task seemed overwhelming. But they both knew what mattered most was keeping Cale safe and exposing the truth. The shelter's head veterinarian joined their planning session, adding medical records that showed patterns of neglect in animals that had passed through Sutter's facilities. Each piece strengthened their case. Later that afternoon, a certified letter arrived, Sutter's lawyers threatening legal action if the shelter proceeded with Cale's transfer. Sarah dropped it on the table with disgust. "He's getting nervous," Eli said, scanning the letter. "But we're doing everything by the book this time." Karina stood at the window, watching Cale pace in his enclosure below. "We need a plan that protects both Cale and our evidence. One wrong move and Sutter will use it against us." Together, they mapped out a careful strategy. The transfer to the sanctuary would happen under strict protocols, with multiple witnesses and video documentation. Meanwhile, their evidence packet, with copies secured in several locations, would be ready for law enforcement the moment Cale was safely away. "We'll need to coordinate the timing perfectly," Eli said, standing close beside Karina as they reviewed the final details. "Once we move, Sutter will throw everything he has at stopping us." Karina felt the warmth of his presence, a reminder that she wasn't facing this fight alone anymore. "We've got one thing he doesn't," she said softly. the truth. Sarah gathered the shelter staff for a final briefing. The plan was set: a pre-dawn transfer, multiple secure vehicles, and a carefully selected route to the sanctuary. Every step would be documented, every procedure followed to the letter. As the meeting ended, Karina found herself walking with Eli to the parking lot. The evening air was cool, and stars were beginning to appear above the shelter's roofline. "We've got a solid case," he said, his voice gentle. "And you've got a whole team behind you this time." Karina nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you, Eli, for believing in this, in me." "Always," he replied simply, then added with his characteristic focus, "I'll have the final documentation ready tomorrow. We'll make this count." They parted ways, both knowing that the real challenge still lay ahead. But for the first time in years, Karina felt truly prepared to face whatever Sutter might throw at them. The truth would finally come to light, and Cale would be safe. That made every risk worth taking. The pre-dawn air held a crisp bite as Karina arrived at the shelter's loading area. Stars still dotted the dark sky, their light barely illuminating the small convoy of vehicles being prepared for Cale's transfer. She watched as the transport team performed their second thorough inspection of every vehicle, checking tire pressure, fuel levels, and mechanical systems. "Everything needs to be perfect," Mike, the lead driver, said as he crawled out from under the transport truck. His flashlight beam swept across the reinforced cage mounted securely in the truck bed. "We've gone over every inch twice now. All systems are good to go." Karina nodded, her throat tight with anticipation. The past week had been intense, with multiple teams scouting different routes to the sanctuary. They'd mapped out primary and backup paths, identified safe stopping points, and established emergency protocols. Nothing had been left to chance. Her phone buzzed with another media alert. The video of Cale recognizing her had taken on a life of its own, spreading across social platforms with heartwarming headlines about animal loyalty and second chances. Comments flooded in supporting both Karina and the shelter's work. The positive attention felt strange after years of avoiding the spotlight. "You ready?" Eli appeared beside her, holding 2 paper cups of steaming coffee. "The vet team just gave Cale his mild sedative. He should be calm but alert for the journey." "As ready as I'll ever be," Karina said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Did you see the latest coverage? Hard to miss." Eli smiled. "The public's firmly on your side. Makes Sutter's usual tactics harder to deploy when everyone's watching." The sky began lightening to a pale gray as the shelter staff moved with quiet efficiency. They decided on a minimal escort, just the transport truck, a lead vehicle, and a support truck where Karina would ride with medical supplies and monitoring equipment. Too many vehicles would draw unwanted attention. Karina's heart quickened as they carefully guided Cale into the transport cage. Despite the mild sedative, his golden eyes remained alert, tracking her movement. She approached the cage, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Hey, big guy, ready for a little road trip?" The leopard's ears twitched at her voice, and he pressed closer to the bars. "We're going somewhere safe, somewhere beautiful. You'll love it there." The convoy pulled out just as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in gentle pinks and oranges. Karina settled into the support truck's passenger seat, equipment arranged within easy reach to monitor Cale's vital signs through sensors attached to his cage. The early morning traffic was light, and their progress smooth as they left the city behind. At their first scheduled stop, 2 hours in, Karina checked Cale's readings while speaking softly to him through the cage vents. His heart rate and temperature remained stable, a good sign. "He's handling it like a champ," she told Sarah, their veterinary technician. "No signs of stress beyond normal transport levels." They maintained steady progress through the morning, each mile bringing them closer to their goal. The positive start allowed a tentative hope to bloom in Karina's chest. After everything, the sabotage attempt, the threats, The years of hiding, success felt tantalizingly possible. The team had carefully planned their route through a mountain pass for the final leg of the journey. The winding road, while challenging, would help them avoid major highways and curious onlookers. They'd timed it to hit the pass during typically quiet hours. "Everything's still clear on the traffic feeds," the lead vehicle reported through the radio. "Weather's holding steady. No unexpected vehicles on the approach roads." Karina watched the mountain slopes draw closer, their peaks still holding patches of spring snow. The tight turns ahead would require careful navigation, but they'd chosen experienced drivers familiar with mountain routes. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for Dot as they began their ascent into the pass. Karina kept her eyes on Cale's monitoring equipment while maintaining a steady stream of gentle conversation. "You're doing so well," she murmured. "Just a few more hours, and you'll have all the space you deserve." The morning sun now sat high in the clear sky, casting sharp shadows across the steep terrain ahead. The convoy moved at a careful pace, maintaining radio contact as they navigated the first series of switchbacks. For these precious hours, with progress steady and Cale calm, Karina allowed herself to believe they might actually succeed. The support truck's radio crackled with updates from the lead vehicle as they coordinated their approach to the most challenging section of the pass. Everything proceeded according to plan, each vehicle maintaining proper spacing and speed. They'd chosen this route specifically to avoid prying eyes, and so far, their strategy seemed to be working perfectly. Karina checked her phone briefly, noting new supportive messages from shelter staff back at base. The latest media coverage continued to frame their mission positively, focusing on the heartwarming aspects of Cale's story and the dedication of the transfer team. It felt like a vindication after so many years of doubt and shadows. "Vital signs still stable," Sarah confirmed, checking their latest readings. "He's handling the altitude change well." Looking ahead at the winding road disappearing around the next bend, Karina took a deep breath. They were making this happen, step by careful step. The morning's smooth progress had them right on schedule, and for these moments, success felt wonderfully, terrifyingly possible. Chapter 8. The mountain road twisted like a serpent through the early morning mist. Karina watched through the passenger window as their small convoy navigated the sharp turns. The transport trailer ahead swayed gently, carrying precious cargo. Cale, finally on his way to freedom. The rising sun painted the mountain peaks in soft gold, and for a moment, everything felt right with the world. That peace shattered in an instant. A black SUV burst from a hidden access road, cutting off their lead vehicle with a screech of tires. The transport truck swerved hard, brake lights flaring red through the fog. Before anyone could react, another SUV rammed the trailer from behind. The impact sent a horrible grinding sound of metal against metal echoing through the canyon. "No!" Karina screamed as the trailer began to tip. Time seemed to slow as she watched it list toward the ravine's edge, where loose gravel crumbled into nothingness. The convoy ground to a halt, vehicles scattered across the narrow mountain shoulder. Dust billowed around them like a dirty curtain. Through the chaos, Karina heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of metal shearing as two of the anchor points securing Cale's cage broke free. Without hesitation, she yanked her door open and jumped out. The wind whipped her hair into her face as she fought her way toward the listing trailer. Her boots slipped on loose stones that skittered over the edge into the abyss below. "Cale!" she called out. Inside the trailer, she heard the Leopard slam against the walls of his cage, his cries wild with fear. The whole structure groaned as it settled precariously near the edge. Two men emerged from the attacking SUVs, making a show of checking their vehicles for damage. Karina recognized the calculated performance, Sutter's people, trying to make this look like a simple traffic accident. But the precision of the attack was obvious. They had known exactly where to wait, exactly how to hit the trailer. We need straps now. She shouted to the rest of the team. They were already moving, pulling emergency equipment from the support vehicles. But they all knew they were racing against time and gravity. Karina didn't wait. She climbed onto the trailer's unstable frame, feeling it shift under her weight. More gravel cascaded into the empty air below. Inside, Cale's cage had slid toward the lower end, the two broken anchor points leaving it dangerously mobile. "Easy, boy," she called softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Easy now." The leopard's golden eyes locked onto her, wild with panic but somehow still trusting. He remembered her. Even now, in this chaos, he remembered her. The trailer creaked ominously. One wrong move, one shift in the wrong direction, and both cage and cat would go over the edge. Karina spread her weight carefully, inching closer to where she could reach the remaining anchor points. "Rope's coming up," someone called from below. She caught the first strap as it was tossed to her, threading it through the cage's frame with trembling fingers. Sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cool mountain air. "More," she called. "We need at least 3 points secured." She could hear Sutter's men arguing with the convoy's security team, maintaining their charade of an accident. But she blocked it all out, focusing only on the immediate crisis. Cale's life hung literally in the balance, and she refused to let him down. Not again. Not after everything. Another strap came up, then another. With each one she secured, the cage's deadly slide toward the edge slowed. But the trailer's position remained precarious, and every movement had to be measured. Careful, precise. Cale growled low in his throat as the cage shifted again. "I know, boy," Karina soothed. "I know, just hold on a little longer." The morning sun broke through the dust cloud, highlighting the sheer drop just feet away. Karina forced herself not to look down as she worked. The wind tugged at her clothes, trying to push her off balance. But she held firm, channeling every ounce of determination she'd built up over the past 10 years. More team members had reached the trailer now, working to stabilize it from multiple angles. They moved with urgent precision, knowing that one wrong step could spell disaster. The crunch of gravel under their feet mixed with the sound of straps being pulled tight, and Cale's increasingly agitated growls. Through it all, Karina maintained a steady stream of soft words to the leopard. "You're going to be okay," she promised. "We're not letting you go. Not now, not ever." The trailer gave another sickening lurch, and fresh pebbles bounced into the void, but the straps held. Slowly, carefully, they were turning catastrophe into mere crisis. Yet Karina knew they weren't safe yet. The scene around them was still chaos. Sutter's men continuing their performance, the security team documenting everything, and through it all, the constant threat of gravity pulling at the unstable trailer. She caught movement in her peripheral vision, one of Sutter's men edging closer, phone in hand. Documenting or waiting for failure? She couldn't tell, but his presence made her skin crawl. This was what Sutter wanted. Cale eliminated, the evidence gone, wrapped up in a tragic accident on a mountain road. But he had underestimated her again. Just as he had 10 years ago when she'd first rescued a starving leopard cub. Sutter had mistaken her quiet determination for weakness. Now as then, she would prove him wrong. Chapter 9. Karina's boots scraped against the tilted metal frame as she inched closer to Cale's cage. Her heart pounded, but she forced her breathing to stay steady. The leopard thrashed against the steel bars, his golden eyes wide with terror as the cage hung precariously over the edge of the mountain pass. "Easy, sweet boy," she called out softly, keeping her voice level despite the wind whipping around them. "I'm right here with you." Cale's massive head snapped toward her voice. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the recognition that had started this whole journey flickered between them again. His frantic movements slowed, and his chest heaved with heavy breaths. "That's it," Karina soothed. carefully raising her hands where he could see them. She maintained a calm, open posture despite the metal groaning beneath her feet. "You remember me? We've been here before, haven't we? Just you and me." Behind her, she heard the team scrambling into action. "Lines coming." "Your way," someone shouted. Heavy ropes sailed through the air, landing within reach. Cale watched intently as Karina slowly moved to secure the first corner of his cage. The frame shifted slightly, and loose gravel skittered down the ravine. She refused to look down, keeping her movements deliberate and her voice steady. "You're doing so well," she murmured to Cale. "Just a little longer." A faint sound caught her attention, the rising wail of sirens echoing up the mountain pass. A small smile tugged at her lips as she realized Eli's careful planning was falling into place. The authorities were coming, right on schedule, thanks to the evidence they had meticulously compiled. The team worked quickly to secure more lines while Karina kept Cale calm. She had just reached for another rope when movement flashed in her peripheral vision. One of Sutter's men lunged toward her, clearly intending to knock her off the unstable platform. "Look out!" a voice shouted. Before the attacker could reach her, one of the handlers tackled him with a solid thud. They rolled away from the edge, grappling in the dust as more sirens grew closer. "Pull," called the team leader. 3, 2, 1. With synchronized effort, the team heaved on the lines. The cage groaned but began to shift back toward center. Karina braced herself, maintaining eye contact with Cale as his enclosure slowly leveled out. Police vehicles appeared around the bend, lights flashing. Officers poured out with weapons drawn, quickly surrounding Sutter's ambushers who had nowhere to run on the narrow mountain road. "Hands where we can see them," an officer commanded. Karina heard car doors slamming and caught glimpses of federal agents arriving on the scene. One of them held up a document that made her heart leap, the warrant they had been building toward. Based on all those falsified permits and shell companies, the cage settled with a final metallic creak, now safely centered on the trailer. Cale's breathing had steadied, though his eyes remained fixed on Karina. She smiled at him, relief washing through her entire body. "Federal agents. Harold Sutter, you're under arrest." Karina turned to see Sutter being led from his vehicle in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. The man who had destroyed her career and endangered countless animals was finally facing justice. More officers moved in to secure the scene. While animal care specialists checked on Cale, the Leopard remained surprisingly calm, responding to Karina's continued soft words of reassurance. The mountain pass that had nearly spelled disaster now hummed with purposeful activity as law enforcement documented the scene, and arrested Sutter's conspirators. Eli appeared at the edge of the gathering, clipboard in hand as he spoke with federal agents. He caught Karina's eye and gave her a small nod. Their careful planning and documentation had paid off perfectly, creating an ironclad case that would be impossible to slip away from this time. The sun broke through the clouds as Karina finally climbed down from the trailer, her legs shaky but her spirit soaring. She watched as Cale's cage was properly secured for the remainder of the journey. The Leopard had settled onto his belly, his golden eyes heavy-lidded but still tracking her movements. "You're safe now," she whispered, touching the cage one last time. "We both are." Sutter was being read his rights as agents began seizing documents from his vehicle. The man who had once seemed untouchable now looked small and defeated, his expensive clothes dusty from the mountain road. His empire of false permits and illegal wildlife trafficking was falling apart piece by piece. The team regrouped around the convoy, checking equipment and preparing to complete their journey to the sanctuary. The crisis had been averted. Justice was being served, and most importantly, Cale was safe. Karina felt 10 years of weight lifting from her shoulders as she watched the scene unfold, knowing that this time the truth had finally come to light. Chapter 10. In the days following Sutter's arrest, News coverage exploded across local and national media. Headlines that had once questioned Karina's judgment now celebrated her courage and dedication. Morning shows played the viral video of Kale recognizing her, followed by interviews with wildlife experts explaining the significance of such a profound animal-human bond. Breaking: wildlife trafficking ring exposed, blazed one headline. Federal agents uncover years of falsified permits, declared another. Each new revelation further vindicated Karina's actions from a decade ago. From her small apartment, Karina watched as Sutter's carefully constructed empire crumbled. Federal investigators discovered dozens of fake shell companies, each one linking back to illegal wildlife trades. Former employees came forward with stories that matched Karina's experience, describing how Sutter had threatened and bullied anyone who questioned his methods. The shelter sent her daily updates about Kale's journey to the sanctuary. When they confirmed his safe arrival, Karina felt tears of relief stream down her face. The sanctuary staff reported that he was settling in well, exploring his new enclosure with growing confidence. A week after the transfer, Karina drove to the sanctuary. The morning air was crisp and clear as she parked near the perimeter fence. She had deliberately come early, before any other visitors would arrive. A staff member led her to a quiet section of the fence line. "He's usually in this area during morning hours," they explained before discreetly stepping away to give her privacy. Karina stood quietly, her hands resting lightly on the fence. After a few minutes, movement caught her eye. Kale emerged from a cluster of trees, his powerful form moving with fluid grace. He paused, nose lifting to catch her scent on the breeze. Her heart swelled as the leopard padded closer, showing none of the wariness he typically displayed toward humans. At the fence, he pressed his head against the mesh where her hands rested. Tears flowed freely down Karina's cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for remembering, for helping make things right." Kale rumbled softly, a sound she remembered from his cub days. They stayed like that for several minutes, connecting across the barrier that kept them both safe while honoring their shared past. As word of Sutter's arrest spread through the wildlife conservation community, Karina's phone began ringing with opportunities. Sanctuaries and rehabilitation centers reached out, eager to have someone with her proven dedication and integrity join their teams. This time, she carefully considered each offer. The publicity had given her leverage, but she wanted to be sure her next step aligned with her values. She declined positions that felt too political or removed from hands-on animal care. Instead, she found herself drawn to a role that combined direct animal rehabilitation with educational outreach. The position would allow her to work closely with rescued wildlife while also advocating for better protection laws and ethical treatment standards. "I want to prevent what happened to Kale from happening to other animals," she explained to the sanctuary director during her interview. "But I need to stay connected to the daily work of helping them heal and thrive." As she left the sanctuary after accepting their offer, she found Eli waiting by his car in the parking lot. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves in the warm afternoon sun. The sight of him brought a smile to her face. He had become such a steady presence during their fight for justice. They fell into step together, walking along the sanctuary's outer path. Neither felt the need to fill the quiet with words. The peace between them felt natural, built on shared values and mutual respect. "How's he doing?" Eli finally asked, nodding toward the sanctuary. "Good, really good," Karina replied. "He's where he should be now. We both are." Eli smiled, understanding in his eyes. They had both seen enough deception and manipulation to appreciate the simple truth of this moment. Whatever grew between them would be founded on honesty, no false permits, no hidden agendas. Just two people who had fought for what was right. They walked on as the sun warmed the sanctuary grounds. Somewhere inside, Cale was beginning his new life in safety. And outside, Karina was doing the same, her reputation restored and her path forward finally clear. The justice they had fought for had landed. Cale was safe in his sanctuary home. And, most importantly, Karina had reclaimed not just her good name, but her sense of purpose. As she walked beside Eli, she felt the quiet certainty that this was just the beginning of a life built on truth and compassion. If this story warmed you, tonight, subscribe and leave a single line that stayed with you. Your words shape tomorrow's story.